Hey everybody, Jason Sherman here. In today's episode of Zero to CEO, I speak with Paula Paul. She's a founder and distinguished engineer at Greyshore. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
And today we're going to cover the topic, unlocking the power of open source and SaaS growth. And everyone who knows me right now knows that I'm currently in the middle of running a SaaS company, so I'm going to have a lot of interesting questions for you. But before we get started, let's talk about open source software, and because it's kind of a topic that some people really don't understand how to utilize it or what it is. So for our audience, can you explain the value of open source software?
Sure. And I would say, technically open source software is software where the source code or the code is available and under what's called a permissive license, in which you're allowed to use that software for your company's benefit or your business's benefit.
Are there any downsides to using it?
Well, it is volunteer. Often the maintainers do so because they either are at companies that use that software or they contribute their fixes back according to the licenses and free distribution of software. So if a security issue comes up, you may not have someone to call and say, hey, fix this. But many open source packages have relationships with companies who do provide that kind of support.
Yeah, a lot of times when I've used open source software, and I was just using one like last week on GitHub, somebody released some, really cool piece of software. It's kind of relying on you to then expand on the software. Like it's kind of like a framework, at least in my opinion, it's kind of like a framework. Like, hey, here's this really cool technology, and now you build on top of it. Is that kind of like the consensus?
I would say that was the origins, but we are now seeing, and you brought up SaaS, that there are full SaaS solutions that are open source that you can use and then extend or customize. So I think that software, and in particular open source, has really gone through a lot of evolution over the past many years.
Cool. And I noticed in the show notes, it says you started your tech career in the 80s as a software engineer at IBM. And interestingly enough, when I graduated college in 98, that was my first job was at IBM as a software support rep. So you were shipping your first product on a magnetic tape. I was using the internet. I don't think there were really many more magnetic tapes, but talk about like your kind of evolution of roles over the years and like the kinds of things you've done in product development or engineering. Like, tell us about your background a little bit. It sounds interesting.
Oh, goodness. So I was a software engineer at IBM, and that's really, straight out of college, IBM sent me to IBM training because there was a proprietary language, 360 assembly language. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of training that was specific to IBM. And then I spent maybe 9 years in that role and jumped off into the PC software industry at a company called MapInfo. At the origins of desktop mapping, and worked with a company called Tela Atlas that actually is now, or did provide many of the Google Maps. So in the early days of that age, went from there into consulting circles in Boston consulting areas and wound up with Microsoft Consulting Services.
It's a lot of companies, a lot of jumping around. I mean, I have a very similar background. The difference is, at least I always try to tell people, the difference is in the tech world when we graduated college and we started out versus now, leaps and bounds. But can you like tell me how you feel about it, like the differences and how it's kind of impacted your life?
Sure. I think technology is an amazing career, and it's not for anyone necessarily who wants to just do the same thing for 30 years. Technology is about change, and I find, compared to my first programming, now the technology is the easy part, and it continues to evolve with prompt engineering and AI assisted programming. So if you like code or programming or creation for computers, it's a career of constant change. So if you like that and you're interested in continuous learning, it's a wonderful career.
That's really, you bring up a good point. It's constant change. And people think when you say AI, because you mentioned AI and prompt engineering, and that's actually a job now, prompt engineering. Who would have thought just a couple of years ago that that's a real job? But it is, right? It's, you need to know how to, an AI is just a tool You need to learn how to use the tool, right? And just like a drill, you can't build a house if you buy a drill. You need to learn how to use it, right? So,
Exactly.
I realize I'm using ChatGPT all this time, and then Gemini and Llama and, Anthropic and Perplexity and all these amazing tools, trying them all out. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's this thing called Cursor where you can code, and there's this other thing called Notebook LM where you can learn. And it's just, now you have to really keep adapting and adapting and adapting. So I really like that you mentioned that. Now, when we talk about SaaS, right, software as a service, that's what it stands for, in case anyone doesn't know. I'm running one now, and maybe you've ran one before, or you are now as well. Why have companies shifted from tech companies to SaaS companies? And also, why are people even saying SaaS is dead when it's not true?
Well, if you even say the acronym out loud as words, it's software as a service. And I can't think of a single organization that's a for-profit company or many nonprofit companies that don't rely on software in order to deliver their services to their customers or constituents.
Thank you.
So I'm the type that says, every company is a SaaS company. You rely on software. It's about how you manage it and how you use it as touch points for your customers and constituents. So you're absolutely a SaaS company.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny because even if you use something like Facebook, it's a service, right? It's software, and you're using it as a service to talk to your friends and family and post your pictures. It's a service. You might not be paying for it except for your privacy and your data, but it's still a software as a service. So let's say people listening to this or watching this, and they're female founders or female potentially business owners. They want to get into the industry. What advice do you have for them starting out in a tech career today?
Follow your passion. And I would say it's easy to get overwhelmed and think you have to learn everything all at once. There's so many things to learn, and tech is always like that. It's almost like saying, I want to learn to do math. You start with some basic things, arithmetic, multiplication, and then maybe if you're really into it and you find something that interests you, you get into linear algebra. So I would say tech is the same way. You're not expected to learn it all at once. Start with a business problem with some value that you want to deliver, and then see how people are using tech to deliver that value.
What aspect, technology is a big word. It's kind of a loaded word because you have hardware, you have software, you have AI, you have infrastructure, you have architecture, you have databases, you have front end. I mean, there's just I can keep going. There's probably a lot more. What's the best way to kind of get your feet wet if you're trying to get into technology that you would recommend to people to kind of really start, just dip their foot in the water, really?
Yeah, two ways. One is if you've got an itch, like say that you're doing something, you're a cook, and it's like, I'm always losing that favorite recipe or these favorite ingredients. And it's like, how would I, build an app for my phone? And these days you can fire up Claude and say, and it'll generate the app for you. Yeah. And then if that really catches your fancy and you like that, continue to follow your passions. Find something that you're interested in and see how you can apply tech of any kind to get into it. Another way would be to see some service online. Maybe it is like a recipe site or a cooking site or the New York Times cooking app, and maybe get curious about how that's written. Like, who does the product management? How do they figure out what features you might be interested in, design or product management? And just follow a thread of your passion and see how people are using tech to deliver that value.
Now, you said something really interesting that has come up as a topic of conversation for me many times in the last couple months. You said, just go to Claude and it'll whip up an app for you. And, there's this new term, vibe coding, where you're just kind of having the AI code for you. Really, you're not understanding what it's doing unless you're a developer like you and I, where we understand the fundamentals of programming and databases and architecture and how APIs work. If you don't know what any of that is and you don't know what it means and you're just having an AI whip up an app for you, this vibe coding situation, how scalable is that going to be? How successful are you going to be? I mean, I'm hearing things about soon there's going to be programmers being hired to fix all the vibe coding. Eventually, that's going to be the new job. Is like all you companies used AI to code your apps, and now we have to hire people specifically just to fix them. What are your thoughts on this whole situation?
Yeah, and that is prompt engineering relies on the ability of the person asking the question to know which questions to ask. You brought up scalability, you brought up maybe an ability to extend an application, the way that you modify something and maintain it. So those are all architectural questions that you learn as you put things into production and operate them at scale. So not everyone has that experience. Um, I do think that by the time you would get to the point that you're running a business based on a product, you would have people on staff that know how to ask those questions.
Mm.
And that's really, you don't want to, anyone can build a house out of Legos, but
Yeah.
I don't think very many people want to live in a house that's
Yeah.
made out of Legos.
Good point. The house of cards will topple over eventually. Makes a lot of sense. And those Legos hurt your feet when you step on them. So
Yeah.
I totally get that. So let's go back to open source for a second, because it's something that I feel like most people don't talk about these days. It's not really an interesting topic. Like AI is really taking over. But let's talk about open source. And if you've seen companies try to use open source technologies, is there a mistake that they're making when they use it?
The primary mistake is lack of awareness. And it hasn't been that long ago that I've spoken with companies that just say, we don't do open source. And then I would say, you have a website, you rely certainly on the JavaScript ecosystem.
HTML,
So,
CSS, Bootstrap,
yeah.
right?
And then, if you are reading headlines, you do see what are called supply chain attacks on the open source ecosystem.
Right.
So if you don't know your dependencies, that's dangerous because you could be depending on something that's got a vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Once you become aware, then it's really important to understand your dependencies and really assess the status of those packages. In years past, maybe products would only have maybe a few hundred dependencies, and now it's thousands and thousands of open source dependencies. So it's
And is there a way to
more
keep them?
critical.
Is there a way to keep your open source supply chain safe? Because it sounds like there's some security problems there, right?
Yep,
What do you recommend? What do you recommend?
And the Linux Foundation is a wonderful resource for this. I serve the board of the OpenJS Foundation
Nice.
for the amazing Robin Ginn, who's the executive director, and we support many of the most critical JavaScript packages, including Node.js, which is billions of downloads.
Huge. Yeah.
So those open source projects are supported by the foundation, and they have security stances about how do we address bugs that are security reports. So it's important to understand how the open source packages that are critical to your supply chain, how those packages are supported.
It's very interesting because I keep hearing the safety and security concerns with AI as well. The governments and organizations are just saying, no, we don't want to, stifle innovation. So we're not going to talk about security, even though Skynet is right around the corner. The machines are coming. So it kind of worries me. What are your thoughts on security and AI?
I do think these are like early days of AI. It's not going to go away. This is another shift in the way that we address telling a computer what to do. And I do think that the transparency of how the models are trained and what the parameters are, open source is even more critical for AI because I think people want to know, well, why was I rejected for this job, or why was I rejected for this loan that I really need? So I think it's going to be an evolution, and transparency is going to be the only way out.
And so you founded a company called Greyshore, and was this all kind of culminated from your love for open source software?
That and more. I spent many years in consulting, starting with my time with Microsoft Consulting Services, and then I had some amazing years with a company called ThoughtWorks, a big consultancy. And then Greyshore is really my own company. It's me, and it's gone anywhere from just me to 40 people working on large projects. And it's my home for my memberships and open source organizations.
Interesting. So if people want to learn more about Greyshore or they want to potentially work with you, how would they do that?
I have greyshore.com is the website, and I always love to make new connections on LinkedIn. So I'm linkedin.com, whack Paula Paul.
Nice. I'll put that, I'll make sure it's in the show notes. Guys, check out greyshore.com. Hope you learned something about open source software and SaaS. Hope you're building something amazing, and we will see you guys in the next episode.